By the early 1970s, Chile stood out as one of Latin America's most resilient democracies. While neighboring nations frequently succumbed to military coups, Chile had maintained a strict tradition of constitutional rule for nearly half a century. That tradition reached a historic milestone in 1970, when Salvador Allende was sworn in as president. He was the first Marxist leader in the world to be democratically elected within a liberal democracy. His platform focused on a rapid redistribution of wealth. He pledged to nationalize major industries and transfer economic power directly to the Chilean working class. The entire world was watching. At the height of the Cold War, this peaceful transition served as a geopolitical test case. If democratic socialism could thrive here, it would challenge the entrenched global order. That democratic experiment ended on the morning of September 11, 1973. Without warning, the Chilean armed forces launched a coordinated mobilization, seizing control of key infrastructure across the capital city of Santiago. The executive branch was rapidly isolated. Troops surrounded La Moneda, the presidential palace, parking military tanks right outside its historic doors and trapping Allende and his closest advisors inside. With phone lines cut and violence escalating in the surrounding streets, the only remaining link between the besieged leadership and the Chilean public was the radio. As the military seized physical control, these dueling radio broadcasts launched a parallel battle to define the legitimacy of the new regime. The destruction of this democracy was fought through rhetoric as much as through bullets. As fighter jets prepared to bombard the palace, Allende managed to connect with Radio Magallanes to deliver his final address to the nation. He did not mince words about what was happening outside his windows. He categorized the military's uprising as absolute treason, explicitly accusing foreign capital and imperialism of creating the climate for the armed forces to break their constitutional oath. Speaking directly to the workers who elected him, he stated he would not resign. Instead, he pledged to pay with his own life to honor the loyalty the people had shown him. This final broadcast was a deliberate act of political defiance. By choosing martyrdom over capitulation, Allende ensured the military could never claim a legitimate, willing transfer of power. At the exact same time, a completely different narrative was being broadcast to the public under the authority of the incoming military junta led by General Augusto Pinochet. The junta's broadcast offered a starkly different diagnosis of the crisis. They labeled Allende's administration a Marxist cancer that had driven the country into economic collapse and moral decay, which they argued could no longer be tolerated. What stands out in the transcript is the chillingly clinical language used by the military. They claimed they were undertaking a painful duty, acting entirely to restore public order and return the country to a path of legal compliance. This clinical rhetoric attempted to sanitize unconstitutional violence by wrapping it in the language of administrative duty. It presented a military assault as a necessary civic repair. Both Allende and Pinochet explicitly claimed they were defending the Constitution and the homeland. For Allende, the homeland was the working class, and the Constitution meant social justice. Conversely, Pinochet argued patriotism required eradicating ideology, enforcing rigid institutional control. On September 11th, the definitions of law and order shifted depending on who held the microphone. The winner of this rhetorical struggle gained the authority to define the state's monopoly on violence. In his broadcast, Pinochet promised the nation there would be no personal vengeance. The immediate aftermath of the coup proved that statement was a calculated lie. The military forces quickly seized civilian infrastructure. Almost overnight, the National Stadium in Santiago, a massive public sports arena, was converted into an infamous mass detention and torture center for political prisoners. This marked the beginning of a 17-year dictatorship. The regime systematically targeted and eliminated political opposition, bringing Allende's darkest warnings to life. The promise to restore order provided the foundational propaganda for what became an absolute dictatorship. The brutal reality of the next 2 decades redefined every word spoken in those initial broadcasts. Before the radio signal was cut, Allende closed his final speech with a prophecy. He told his listeners that, much sooner than later, the great avenues will open for free people to walk through. That specific phrase, Las Grandes Alamedas, survived the long years of the dictatorship. It eventually became the defining rallying cry for the civilian movement that forced a return to democracy in 1990. The 1973 coup reveals a difficult truth about how democracies fall. Authoritarian takeovers rarely announce themselves as villains, they broadcast themselves as saviors. Our ability to clearly see through the rhetoric of power is the final defense of any free society.